I never thought I'd spend my 68th birthday alone, outside a dusty old garage that smelled like rust, oil, and years gone by. But there I was, key trembling in my hand, because my son, Evan, had slammed the door in my face. "You're a burden, Mom," he'd said. Dad knew better than to leave you anything real. He got the Skyline condo, the view, the life we built. And me? I got this. An address on a fading envelope and a single key. My tears blurred the streetlights as I turned it in the lock. The door groaned like it hadn't been opened in decades. Dust swirled in the beam of my flashlight, catching on the air like memories. I pushed, expecting cobwebs and junk, maybe a broken workbench. But when the door swung wide and my light cut through the dark, I froze. My breath caught in my chest. What I saw inside wasn't ruin. It was revelation. The next morning, I sat in a chair that didn't belong to me, in a room that smelled of polished wood and other people's power. Across from me, Evan scrolled on his phone like none of this mattered. Chloe flipped through a real estate brochure, lips pursed like she could already taste her next property. Mr. Sanders cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "As per Mr. Harlow's instructions," he began, "this is the final reading of the will." The air felt too tight. My hands gripped the fabric of my skirt, as if bracing for a blow I couldn't quite name. "To Evan Harlow," the lawyer continued, "the condo at 1725 Bayview Tower, the investment portfolio attached to account 09XTB, and its current holdings." Evan smirked, his thumb finally stopping mid-scroll. Chloe leaned in. "That's the one with the rooftop pool, right?" Mr. Sanders didn't respond. He turned to the second envelope. "To Teresa Harlow," he read, "the garage at 84 Harbor Lane and its contents." Silence bloomed like a bruise. Evan looked up. "Wait, that's it?" Chloe blinked. "The garage, is that even zoned for anything?" I sat still. My heart didn't drop. It locked. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't random. Henry had planned this. Mr. Sanders closed the file with a soft thud. "Everything is legally binding and precisely as Mr. Harlow instructed." Evan's laugh was short, ugly. "That man left me real assets. He left her a storage unit." Chloe folded the brochure slowly. "We'll have to rethink hosting here. There's not enough space for both the condo and caretaking." The word stung. Caretaking. "I won't be a problem," I said quietly. Evan raised an eyebrow. "You're not staying here, Mom. The condo's got 2 bedrooms. Chloe needs an office, and we've got guests coming this weekend." I nodded. "Of course." "You'll manage with the garage," he added, already standing. "It's what he left you." Chloe didn't look at me. She just said, "We can't babysit her." The ride back to the condo was silent. I held the envelope on my lap like it might burn through my skirt. Evan kept glancing at his watch. Chloe hummed along to a song on the radio that I couldn't hear, or maybe didn't want to. When we arrived, Evan handed me a small suitcase. Not even mine. Just something with wheels and a zipper. "There's a cot in the garage, I think," he said. "Might be dusty." I didn't answer. I didn't cry. I just took the handle and walked to the curb, alone. The wind bit at my cheeks as I waited for the rideshare I'd booked myself. No one offered to wait with me. No one asked if I had a blanket or coat. Chloe closed the door with a soft click. Evan didn't say goodbye. As the car pulled away, I turned back one last time. The skyline was stunning, glittering like promise. But it wasn't mine. It never had been. In my lap, the envelope felt heavier now, not from weight, but from everything it had taken to hand it to me. The driver asked where we were headed. I gave him the address. Garage? He asked, glancing at me in the mirror. I smiled softly, but it didn't reach my eyes. No, I said, not anymore. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the garage in daylight was how quiet it was. Not the kind of silence that soothed, but the kind that pressed against your skin, thick, still, expectant. The morning light barely touched the corners, and every breath I took tasted like dust and old iron. I stood there for a long moment, letting my eyes adjust and my heart slow down. It was colder than I expected. The garage door had stuck halfway open, groaning like it hadn't moved in years. I ducked beneath it, my suitcase catching on the frame. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of metal, oil, and memory. A narrow window on the far wall let in a shaft of pale light that landed on a canvas draped over something massive in the center of the room. Cobwebs clung to the corners like forgotten promises. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with labeled boxes, carefully arranged tools, and thick leather binders. Nothing looked abandoned. It looked preserved, curated, cared for. I stepped forward, my footsteps muffled against the concrete floor. My flashlight beam caught the edge of the canvas. The shape beneath it was unmistakable, long, sleek, low to the ground. My fingers reached out before I even realized what I was doing. The canvas was stiff, but it peeled back with a soft crackle of dust and time. Underneath was a car. But not just any car. A 1965 Shelby 427 Cobra, blue with white racing stripes, paint so polished it reflected my face like water. I stumbled back, heart racing, breath quick. I'd seen one once, years ago, in a museum Henry took me to. He'd called it art disguised as horsepower. I blinked, then pulled the rest of the canvas away. Next to it, nestled like royalty in a private hall, sat a 1963 Jaguar E-Type lightweight, silver and silent like a sleeping cat. And beside that, impossibly, a 1955 Porsche 550 Spider, the body a smooth, brushed steel, with a small emblem that read "Little Bastard" near the front wheel. 3 classic cars, 3 legends, just sitting there. I backed away, hand over my mouth, shaking. These weren't just valuable. They were irreplaceable. The kind of machines people flew across the world to see, let alone own. I didn't need an appraisal. I knew what they were worth. Anyone who'd ever loved cars would know. And Henry had loved cars. My knees buckled slightly as I lowered myself onto a nearby stool. In the silence, I could almost hear him chuckling. "Told you to never underestimate a closed door," he used to say. I stared at the Cobra, trying to understand what kind of man hides millions of dollars behind a roll-up door in a forgotten garage. Then I saw it, an envelope, yellowed with age but sealed, placed on the workbench beneath a glass paperweight shaped like a gearshift. My name was written in Henry's handwriting. I reached for it with trembling fingers. My eyes burned again, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Inside was a single letter, folded 3 times. The paper smelled faintly of engine oil and cedar, just like him. "If you're reading this, Tess, then the key found the right hands. This garage holds more than metal. It holds measure. I left Evan what he asked for, visibility. But what I've left you is value. Not in dollars, though yes, there's plenty of that here, but in choices and in truth. I trained him to build, but I trusted you to restore." My hand rose to my chest. The words cut deeper than any slap, but softer than any kiss. I could hear his voice behind them. "There's a safe beneath the red tool chest. You'll remember the combination. It's the day you said yes, and I started becoming the man you made me. Inside, you'll find what's needed to begin again, but only if your heart is still stronger than your pride. I folded the letter carefully and held it to my chest, as if the warmth of my body might keep his voice inside me a little longer. I didn't move right away. I sat in that stool and just breathed. Let the silence wash over me. Let the truth rearrange the wreckage inside. Then, slowly, I stood and walked to the far corner. The tool chest was large, faded red, its edges worn from years of work. Beneath it was a steel hatch in the floor, almost invisible if you didn't know where to look. I knelt and cleared the dust away. The numbers came back like a whisper. 07-18, 1972. Our wedding day. I turned the dial, each click echoing in the silence. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from memory. When the final number landed, I held my breath and pulled the lever. A heavy metallic sound clunked in response, and the safe door creaked open. Inside was a small black box, velvet-lined. Next to it, a thick folder labeled Trust, T. Harlow. And beside that, resting gently atop the stack, was Henry's old pocket watch. I reached for the watch first. Its silver case was warm to the touch. Despite the chill in the room, I turned it over. Etched on the back were 5 simple words. For T, time reveals truth. I pressed the side button. The lid popped open with a soft click. The watch was still ticking. A sob nearly escaped, but I swallowed it down. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the trust folder. Inside was documentation signed and notarized. The trust fund was real. The assets listed were staggering. The garage itself had been retrofitted with climate control, security, even fire suppression, all hidden behind those old wooden doors. Henry had protected everything. Quietly. Completely. A sheet near the back caught my eye. Appraisals from a private classic car valuation group. The numbers confirmed what my heart already knew. These vehicles were worth over $11 million. I leaned back against the wall, the watch in one hand and the trust in the other. I thought about Evan, about the way he'd looked at me like I was furniture no longer needed. I thought about Chloe's clipped voice, her cold hands gathering throw pillows as if that were my goodbye. They had taken the condo, the skyline, the illusion. But Henry had given me something else, not just assets, not just wealth. He'd given me a choice. He'd given me the truth, and maybe a way forward. The morning sun slipped further across the concrete, stretching long through the slats in the garage door. It lit up the silver hood of the Porsche, and the reflection danced faintly against the ceiling. I rose slowly, walked to the Mustang parked in the back corner, our first car, the one he taught me to drive in, and opened the glove box. Inside was a folded piece of paper with directions, hand-drawn in Henry's precise lines. At the top, it read, Astoria Cottage. Below, a simple note, you'll know when you're ready. I sat in the driver's seat of the Mustang and let my hands rest on the wheel, fingertips brushing the grooves he once gripped. The leather was worn smooth, but it still held the shape of years, of Sunday drives, of roadside repairs, of the life we built together in the quiet spaces no one else saw. The garage didn't feel cold anymore. It felt sacred, like a chapel built not of stone and stained glass, but of steel, silence, and love that had outlasted the body that carried it. I traced the edge of the watch's cover one more time, listening to the soft tick-tick-tick, like a heartbeat you'd forgotten was there until you stopped moving long enough to hear it again. Henry hadn't just left me money. He'd left me meaning. He'd left Evan something loud, height, glass, views, the illusion of legacy. But for me, he'd left something that whispered, that endured, choices, time, and the gentle dare to see if I'd use both with grace. I stood and moved to the garage door, pressing the button to close it. The motor hummed low, and the door lowered slowly, letting one last sweep of light slide across. The floor. It paused for a second at the edge of the Porsche's wheel, glinting like morning dew, then disappeared into shadow. I turned off the flashlight. I didn't need it anymore. Instead, I walked back toward the workbench, picked up the letter, the watch, and the directions to Astoria, and placed them gently into a small leather satchel I found on the shelf. I zipped it shut and stood a little taller. The dust no longer bothered me. The silence no longer unnerved me. The weight of solitude had shifted. It was no longer punishment. It was potential. I stepped outside, the sun warming my face as the door rolled shut behind me. For a moment, I stood there at the edge of what had been grief and what now felt like inheritance, not of things, but of wisdom. A breeze lifted the hem of my coat. Somewhere far off, I heard the gulls calling above the harbor. I looked down at the key in my hand, the same one Evan had laughed at, the same one Chloe dismissed. I turned it over in my fingers, the metal catching the light. This wasn't just a key, it was a test. And I had passed it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the garage with a blanket draped over my shoulders and the pocket watch ticking softly in my hand, its steady rhythm soothing something ancient inside me. The air smelled like cedar, leather, and steel. Not sterile, not empty, just still, as if everything had been waiting for me to arrive. At dawn, I pulled out my old phone and scrolled through contacts until I found the number Henry once scribbled on a napkin and tucked into a drawer. Liam Graves, classic car appraiser, collector, and one of the few people Henry ever called a man who understands craftsmanship. I pressed call. He picked up after 2 rings. "This is Liam." I hesitated, unsure how to start. "My name is Teresa Harlow. You knew my husband, Henry." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Well, I'll be damned. Teresa, Henry used to say you were the one person who could outdrive him and outthink him. He was half proud and half terrified." I smiled despite myself. "He left me something. I think I need help understanding what it is." Within a few hours, Liam pulled up in a pickup truck that looked like it belonged in another century, dusty, reliable, and humming with quiet power. He walked into the garage and stopped cold, eyes scanning the lineup of vehicles like he'd entered a sacred vault. "Well, hell," he muttered, stepping forward. "You weren't kidding." He didn't speak for a while, just walked around each car with reverent silence, his fingers hovering just above the paint, not quite touching. Then he turned to me, eyes wide with a kind of wonder I hadn't seen in a long time. "Teresa, these are blue-chip collectibles. I mean, Shelby, Jag Lightweight, Porsche 550. This isn't a garage. It's a museum. Maybe 11, maybe 14 million if the provenance checks out. And knowing Henry, it will." I exhaled, the numbers not shocking me so much as confirming what my heart already knew. He hid them here, and gave Evan the condo. Liam nodded slowly. Henry always said visibility wasn't the same as value. He said, "Skylines shine, but soil sustains." I never really understood it. I think maybe you're supposed to. I said nothing. Just let the words settle. Liam walked toward the Mustang and tapped the hood lightly. He told me once, "She'll find it when she's ready." I think that was a promise, not a prediction. He left shortly after, promising to send formal appraisals and connect me with a transport service if needed. I thanked him and handed him one of Henry's old notebooks as a keepsake. It felt right. Once he was gone, I returned to the workbench and laid out the Astoria directions again. The map was hand-drawn, labeled with small notes only Henry would have written. Near the end of the winding path was a sketch of a cottage beside cliffs, surrounded by sea anemones and wildflowers. In the margins, he'd scribbled, "Needs light blue shutters. Nora will know." I folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into the satchel. Just as I began gathering my things, my phone buzzed. A name appeared across the screen I hadn't expected. Evan. I stared at it for a full ring before picking up. "Hello? Mom?" he said. No apology, no hesitation, just the same tone he used when he needed something. "Can you come get your things? Chloe wants to clear the guest room." "Of course," I said. My voice didn't tremble. "You'll come today?" "No, tomorrow morning." He paused. "Fine." He hung up without another word. I stood there a moment, phone still in my hand. The air in the garage felt different now. Less like a cage, more like a forge. I looked down at the pocket watch resting in my palm. Its steady ticking felt louder than before, like a heartbeat, no longer afraid of being heard. I opened the side closet near the back wall and found my old coat hanging exactly where I'd left it 3 winters ago. It was a soft wool blend, gray with deep pockets and a missing button near the cuff. I slipped it on, surprised it still fit. The weight of it comforted me. It reminded me of late nights in the cold, Henry handing me coffee in a travel mug, grease on his hands, and pride in his eyes. On the shelf above were a few of my things from the old house: an umbrella, a canvas tote bag with faded handles, and a scarf Henry had bought in Prague. I took the scarf and wrapped it around my neck, then folded the rest into the bag. I moved with purpose now. I placed the letter back into its envelope, tucking it inside the satchel with the trust papers and map. I didn't know what Astoria held, but it felt like something sacred, something private. I didn't need Evan to understand that. He wasn't ready to. In the mirror above the workbench, I caught my reflection. My hair was grayer than I remembered. My eyes had lines at the corners, but they didn't look tired anymore. They looked awake. I zipped the satchel, turned off the garage lights, and stepped into the cold morning. The wind swept through the alley, lifting the edges of my coat and scarf. I tightened both, then turned back to the garage door. There was a moment, a long breath where I just stood there, looking at the building that once symbolized failure. Now it felt like armor, like home, like the starting point of something Henry had designed not with blueprints, but with hope. I whispered softly, "Thank you." The door closed behind me with a gentle finality. As I walked toward the main street, I didn't feel rushed. I didn't feel bitter. I felt something settle in my bones, something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. I would go to the condo tomorrow. I would pack my things without fuss, without confrontation. I would say goodbye not with anger, but with clarity. Because I knew now that my worth had never lived in a high-rise. It had always been here, in the quiet hum of legacy, in the smell of oil and memory, in the hands that remembered how to build something lasting. I didn't need revenge. I had something better. Direction. I pulled the satchel over my shoulder, slipped the watch into my pocket, and walked into the sunlight. The next morning, I returned to the condo not as a mother desperate for space in her son's life, but as a woman collecting what was hers. The building loomed ahead, a steel and glass monument to ambition. From the outside, it was flawless. Gleaming balconies, angular windows, rooftop terraces. But standing there now, I saw it for what it was. A place of heights with no depth. The doorman barely looked up when I entered. He didn't recognize me. Or maybe he did and chose not to say anything. Either way, I didn't mind. I didn't need acknowledgement, just time. The elevator chimed softly as I reached the 28th floor. The hallway smelled like citrus cleaner and designer perfume. I walked slowly, each step measured, my satchel held tightly under my arm. When I reached the door, I paused, hand hovering over the keypad. I knew the code. I hadn't forgotten. Evan hadn't changed it. Inside, the condo was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that suggested people were home but didn't want to be seen. The curtains were drawn halfway, letting in slanted beams of light that fell across marble floors and chrome fixtures. Everything gleamed, just like Chloe liked it. I stepped into the living room. The skyline stretched out before me through floor-to-ceiling windows. Seattle sparkled in the distance, every skyscraper catching the morning sun like teeth bared in a smile. It was beautiful, cold, untouchable. Evan appeared from the hallway, dressed in athletic wear and holding a protein shake. "You're early," he said, not looking at me. "No," I replied. "You're just used to me being late for your life." He frowned, but didn't respond. Chloe emerged. A few moments later, her hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, phone in one hand, mug in the other. "I left some boxes in the guest room," she said, eyes flicking over me like I was furniture. "Don't take the white one. That's mine." "I'm only taking what's mine," I said calmly. She didn't reply, just turned and disappeared down the hallway again. I walked toward the guest room, each step echoing off the stone tiles. Inside, the boxes were neatly stacked. My name was scribbled in marker across two of them. Teresa, all caps, like a label. I opened the first one. Books, photo frames, a ceramic mug I'd bought on our trip to Mendocino. The second held sweaters, a few scarves, and a messenger bag I hadn't seen in years. I pulled it out slowly and opened the flap. Inside, tucked in the inner pocket, was an envelope. My breath caught. It was Henry's handwriting. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. "If you're reading this, then you're exactly where I knew you'd be. I placed this letter here not because I doubted you, but because I trusted you'd walk away the first time without looking back, and only return once you understood. You never needed to fight for your place. It was never given to you by them. It was earned by the quiet way you loved. If Evan ever finds this, he won't understand. Not yet. But you will." I closed the letter and held it tightly in both hands. The fabric of the bag still smelled faintly of cedar, of old books and rainy mornings and quiet moments by the fire. I pressed the letter to my chest for a moment, breathing in the silence of the room that had never really belonged to me. I stood and moved to the window. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass, buildings rising like monuments to people I didn't know, stories I wasn't part of. Somewhere among them was the tower Henry helped design. I used to be proud of that. Now I simply recognized it for what it was. His work, not his voice. Behind me, Evan leaned against the doorframe. "You really don't have much," he said, eyes on the boxes. "I thought you'd take more." I turned to face him. "These aren't things, Evan. They're chapters." He tilted his head, a smirk pulling at one corner of his mouth. "What's that supposed to mean?" I stepped forward and picked up the smaller box. It means you kept the condo, the investment accounts, the views. But I kept the story, and the story doesn't live here. He didn't answer. For the first time in a long while, he looked unsure. As I zipped up the satchel and stacked the boxes by the door, I noticed something else. An old photo tucked into the corner of a bookshelf. I pulled it free. It was a picture of us, years ago, standing in front of the Mustang with grease on our hands and smiles on our faces. Evan couldn't have been more than 10. I slipped the photo into my coat pocket without a word. Chloe returned just as I was preparing to leave. She didn't look at me, just sipped her coffee and scrolled her phone. "Don't forget the hallway key fob," she said. "We'll need it back." I placed it on the counter beside her. "Of course." Evan stepped closer. "Are you going to sell the garage?" I looked at him, really looked. His tone wasn't curious, it was cautious. "No," I said simply. He raised an eyebrow. "So you're just going to live there, with a bunch of dusty cars?" I smiled faintly. I lived a full life before square footage defined worth. He crossed his arms. "It just seems beneath you." I picked up my satchel and met his eyes. "No, Evan. What was beneath me was this: being handed a guest room in a home I helped build, being treated like a problem you couldn't wait to solve." The garage? That was never beneath me. That was a doorway. He opened his mouth, but I turned away before he could speak. Some silences needed to remain unbroken. As I opened the door, I paused. My reflection caught in the glass of the skyline once more. Older, stronger, clear-eyed. I didn't need the view to feel seen. I stepped into the hallway, pulling the door closed gently behind me. The elevator ride down was quiet, except for the soft hum of machinery and the occasional ding as we passed each floor. I held the satchel tightly in my arms, resting it against my chest like something living. The photo in my pocket felt warm, pressed close to my skin. When the doors opened into the marble lobby, I walked slowly, taking in every detail: the high ceilings, the over-polished floors, the cold elegance that once seemed impressive. Now it felt like a museum of missed connections. Outside, the sun reflected sharply off glass towers, slicing the air into mirrored fragments. A breeze drifted in from the bay, lifting the edge of my scarf. I paused at the curb, looking back once, not at the condo, but at the city behind it. That skyline had once meant something: progress, prestige, promise. Now it just looked distant. A car pulled up beside me, the driver stepping out to load the boxes I'd brought down earlier. As he opened the trunk, I placed my satchel gently on the seat beside me and slid in, closing the door without a sound. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back. Instead, I looked forward, toward the road, toward whatever lay past the shimmering towers and designer facades. I thought of the garage, the quiet strength it held. I thought of the pocket watch ticking faithfully in my coat, and I thought of Astoria, a place I hadn't seen, but already understood. As we drove along the edge of the city, the skyline shrank behind us, smaller, less imposing, less loud. In its place, space began to open. Sky, trees, roads that curved gently instead of climbing skyward. The farther we got from the condo, the more I felt something loosen inside me. Not anger, not sadness, just release. The Mustang waited for me in the garage like a promise kept. Its curves glinted in the light, filtering through the overhead panels. I slid behind the wheel and rested my hands on the steering wheel. The leather was warm, familiar. I started the engine. It roared to life with a soft growl, old, proud, alive. I didn't need a skyline anymore. I had direction. The law office sat on the edge of the harbor, tucked between an old cafe and a flower shop that smelled of sea salt and jasmine. Clara Reyes didn't keep a high-rise corner office or a secretary screening calls. Her door opened with a soft chime, and the waiting room was lined with well-worn leather chairs and paintings of lighthouses and quiet shorelines. She stood when I entered, hand extended, a calm smile on her face. "Mrs. Harlow," she said, "I'm Clara. I've reviewed the materials you sent." I took her hand, felt the steadiness in her grip. "Thank you for seeing me so quickly." She motioned for me to sit. Her desk was covered in folders, each one labeled in neat handwriting. She picked up the one marked T. Harlow Trust and opened it without a word. "I've confirmed the trust is airtight," she began. "Fully executed, notarized, and in compliance with Washington state law. Your husband structured it carefully. No one, not even your son, can legally challenge its terms without triggering the forfeiture clause." I blinked. "Forfeiture?" She nodded. "If Evan contests your ownership of the assets or files any claim against you, he forfeits his own inheritance. Henry built in a protection mechanism." I exhaled, a quiet breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Of course he did." Clara leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Harlow, Teresa, what your husband did here, it wasn't just about money. He created a moral firewall, a structure designed to see who deserved what." I smiled faintly. "He always believed in building with intention. He also ensured you'd never have to defend yourself alone," she continued. "The documents include an advance power of attorney, a protection clause for any real estate sold under duress, and full authority to transfer assets to a third party should you choose. And the trust grows with compound interest. It's not just valuable, it's growing." I sat back in the chair, letting the weight of it all settle. For the first time since Henry died, I felt fully seen, not just legally, but structurally, secure. "What would you advise?" I asked softly. Clara tapped her pen against the folder. "Let silence be your armor. The more noise they make, the more clearly the truth will echo." The words sat in the air between us, quiet and steady. "I'm not trying to punish him," I said after a pause, "but I'm also not offering grace he hasn't earned." Clara nodded slowly. "Justice doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it just needs to endure." She closed the folder gently and leaned back, folding her hands. "I can file a formal declaration of asset ownership with the county just to create a public record. It's not required, but it draws a line in the sand." "Do it," I said. Quietly. Clara smiled. "Understood." She pulled another folder from her drawer. This one was slimmer, labeled simply, "Relocation Plan." I also reviewed the property in Astoria. The cottage is fully transferred under your name. It was held in a separate deed trust and doesn't tie back to your husband's business holdings, which means it's protected from any entanglement. I looked down at the folder. The cover photo was a real estate snapshot. Light blue shutters, white siding, a garden blooming with wildflowers. It looked like peace. It looked like possibility. "Your husband set this in motion a year before he passed," Clara said quietly. "It wasn't an afterthought. He wanted to give you distance, not just from the city, but from the noise." My fingers traced the edge of the folder. "He always said silence could teach more than words ever could." "He was right," she replied. "You've already done what most people can't, walked away with your dignity intact." I looked out the window. Boats bobbed quietly in the harbor, their masts swaying in the breeze. Somewhere beyond the waterline, Astoria waited. Not just a location, but a new chapter. One I wouldn't need permission to open. Clara gathered the folders, slipped them into a leather binder, and handed it to me. This is yours now. If they come knocking, you don't need to answer. Everything you need is in writing. I took the binder with both hands, feeling its weight, not just in paper, but in purpose. Thank you, I said. She stood and opened the door. Teresa, if you ever need anything, not just legal, I'm here. Some women build skyscrapers, others plant gardens, but both reshape the world. I stepped into the sunlight, binder pressed to my side, wind catching the hem of my coat. Let them keep the skyline. I had my compass. The drive to Astoria felt like shedding skin. Mile by mile, the city fell away. Its glass, its noise, its sharp edges. Trees rose taller along the roadside. The air shifted, crisper, touched by sea salt and pine. I rolled the windows down halfway, letting the wind rush in. My scarf fluttered behind me like a ribbon caught in time. The Mustang handled the curves like it remembered them. The engine hummed a low, loyal rhythm beneath me. Every so often, I'd glance at the satchel on the passenger seat. Inside it, the watch ticked quietly, steady as a heartbeat. Henry's letter was folded neatly beside the trust papers and map. All of it felt less like luggage and more like guidance. By the time I turned onto the narrow road leading to the coast, the sun had shifted behind light clouds, casting a soft silver glow over the water. The directions Henry had drawn guided me through a cluster of tall cypress trees and past a hand-painted sign that read, Seaward Lane. At the end of the lane stood a small white cottage, 2 stories tall with blue shutters and a slanted roof covered in moss. Wildflowers spilled over the stone path leading to the porch. Lavender, poppies, sea anemones, just as he'd described. I pulled the car to a stop and sat there for a moment, staring at it. He had planted peace and waited for me to find it. The door opened before I knocked. A woman stepped out, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, a sun-faded cardigan, and a knowing smile that softened the edges of her lined face. You must be Teresa, she said. I'm Nora Fletcher. Henry told me to expect you, though I didn't know when. I smiled, my throat catching slightly. I think neither did I. She stepped aside and gestured toward the porch. Come on in. The kettle's already on. Inside, the cottage smelled like lemon and old wood. The floors creaked softly with each step. Light filtered through lace curtains, casting quiet patterns across the walls. A woven rug lay beneath a long oak table, and shelves lined with teacups, jars, and books framed the cozy kitchen. Nora poured 2 mugs of tea and handed one to me. We sat by the window, where the ocean stretched beyond the edge of the bluff, gray-blue and endless. He worked on this place for years, she said, stirring her tea. Not just repairs. He chose everything, those shutters, the garden, even the stones on the path. Said you needed a place with no noise, a place that wouldn't ask anything from you. I blinked against the sting behind my eyes. He never told me. Henry believed in letting people arrive when they're ready, not before. I looked around, taking in the space. Every detail felt like a whisper from him, gentle, considered, waiting. There's something upstairs I think you should see, Nora said softly. He left it in the front bedroom. Said you'd understand it better in daylight. I followed her up the narrow staircase. The wood railing was smooth from years of hands sliding along it. At the top, The door to the front bedroom stood open. Sunlight poured through the large windows, painting the floor with gold. Inside, leaning against the far wall, was a canvas. Large, unframed, resting gently on a low easel. I stepped closer, my breath catching before I even saw the whole image. It was a painting, oil on canvas, of the coastline just beyond the cottage, but through Henry's eyes. The sky stretched wide, soft amber melting into lavender at the horizon. The sea shimmered with calm movement, and in the foreground bloomed a cluster of sea anemones, painted with almost impossible precision. But it wasn't the beauty of it that stopped me. It was the title. Written on the bottom corner in Henry's handwriting, Coastal Horizon. Nora stepped beside me. He worked on that for months, always said it wasn't just a view, it was an invitation. I pressed my fingers lightly to my lips. The word echoed, from the letter, from his sketches, from the map in my satchel. Horizon, not skyline. I turned to face the room and took in the rest. A handmade quilt on the bed, a stack of blank notebooks on the desk, a small wooden box on the dresser, the kind Henry used to store old watches and paper clips. And on the wall opposite the window, another note pinned with a brass tack. You found your horizon. I reached for the chair by the desk and sat down slowly, letting the quiet wash over me. Through the open window came the sound of gulls, the whisper of wind through wildflowers, and somewhere beneath it all, the distant rhythmic crash of waves. Nora placed a folded blanket on the foot of the bed. There's fresh bread in the kitchen. I make it every Thursday. Today's Thursday, I said. She winked. Imagine that. I smiled, the kind that starts in your chest and doesn't quite reach your face right away. Did he ever talk about Evan? Nora paused, then sat across from me. Once or twice. He said Evan would need more time, that some lessons only settle when the noise runs out. I nodded slowly. He gave him the skyline. And gave you the ground beneath your feet. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the pocket watch. I opened the lid, let the tick-in fill the room. Nora watched me closely. He said time doesn't just pass. It reveals. I looked up at her, eyes burning gently. He told you that? No, she said. You just did. We sat in silence for a while, two women connected by a man who built his legacy not in glass and steel, but in time and trust. Later, as Nora left to tend the garden, I stayed in the room. I opened one of the blank notebooks and wrote my name on the first page. Nothing else, just a name. Not to claim the space, but to begin something. Outside, the sun shifted lower in the sky, painting everything in soft orange and rose. That evening, I stood on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching the ocean breathe. The waves rolled in and pulled back like they were tethered to some great truth beneath the surface. The air smelled of salt and earth, and the horizon glowed gold where the sea kissed the sky. I held the painting in my arms, having brought it downstairs, and leaned it gently against the porch railing. I wanted to see the real horizon beyond it, to compare Henry's memory to the present moment, and he had captured it perfectly. The curve of the coast, the warmth in the sky, the quiet in the air. It was all here, exactly as he'd painted. But there was something else, too. Me. I was here now, not as a visitor, not as a burden, but as the person he'd quietly prepared this place for. I stepped off the porch and walked the stone path through the wildflowers, letting my fingers graze the petals. When I reached the edge of the bluff, I stopped and looked out over the water. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows and golden light across the surface. Behind me, the cottage windows glowed warmly, the scent of bread and lemon still lingering in the air. I pulled the pocket watch from my coat and opened it. The ticking seemed to blend with the waves. I stood there, listening. And for the first time since Henry's passing, I didn't feel like something had been taken from me. I felt like something had been passed to me. Legacy, not through wealth, but through clarity. He had spent years preparing for this moment, planting a future I hadn't known I'd need. And in doing so, he had given me more than love. He had given me freedom. The watch ticked on, steady and sure. I closed it gently and turned back toward the cottage. Its white frame stood against the deepening sky like a lighthouse, quiet, grounded, ready. As I reached the porch steps, I heard Nora's voice drifting from the kitchen. "Dinner's almost ready, and there's wine, unless you're the tea before bed type." I smiled and stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a soft click, not like an ending, but like the beginning of something I could finally call mine. I first sensed something was wrong when I stopped receiving silence. For weeks, Evan hadn't called, not to ask where I'd gone, not to ask how I was managing, not to check if I needed anything. That suited me fine. But silence has its own texture, and this one had changed. It was no longer the indifference of a man who believed he'd won. It was the quiet of someone circling back, trying to find the pieces they'd missed. When my phone rang that afternoon, I saw his name flash across the screen. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat by the window of the cottage, watching the waves churn under a cloudy sky. The air smelled of rosemary and salt, and Nora was humming softly in the kitchen as she sliced bread. I held the pocket watch in my hand and let it tick, its sound filling the space where guilt used to live. The second call came the next day, and the third the day after that. I answered the fourth, not because I wanted to, but because the silence had started to feel like bait. "Mom," he said without hesitation. "Where are you?" "I'm where your father left me to be," I replied. There was a pause. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm safe. It means I'm not your concern." He scoffed. "You've been gone for weeks and no one knows where you are. Chloe's freaking out. People are asking questions." "That's unfortunate, but I don't recall disappearing being a crime." More silence. Then, tightly, "Did Dad leave you something we don't know about?" So there it was. "No," I said evenly. "He left me exactly what was written." He didn't respond, but the click in his breath told me everything. Chloe had pushed him, or debt had. Maybe both. Either way, the shine of the condo had dulled, and now they were scraping under stones. "You don't sound surprised," he said. "I'm not." "You sound smug." "I'm peaceful." He ended the call without another word. That night, I locked the garage for the first time since arriving and closed every curtain in the cottage. Not out of fear, out of preparation. The next morning, a man appeared down the road. He wasn't from town, too polished, too observant. He didn't come to the door, just stood by the edge of the trees, looking toward the house before turning back the way he came. I didn't need to guess who sent him. When I confronted Nora about it, she nodded once. "He was sniffing around town yesterday, too. Asked about you at the cafe." Locals didn't say much. "I'm sorry if it brings trouble." She shrugged. "We get storms here. Doesn't mean we don't build houses." I sat on the porch that evening, facing the road, arms crossed over my shawl. I wasn't afraid, but I was alert. the kind of still that comes before wind. And sure enough, it came. The next day, Evan showed up. I heard the tires first, too smooth for the gravel, too sharp for a local's pickup. I stood before he even got out of the car. His rented sedan came to a slow stop at the edge of the drive, and he stepped out wearing a jacket that didn't suit the weather and a look that didn't suit the setting. I didn't move. I waited. He walked toward me, eyes scanning the cottage, the bluff, the garden. When he reached the porch, he stopped just short of the steps, like something invisible kept him from crossing. "You live here?" he asked, almost accusing. "I do. This is nicer than I thought it'd be. It wasn't meant to impress you." He glanced around again. "You've been avoiding me. I've been healing. I sent someone to find out what was going on," he said, without shame. "I thought you were hiding something. And now?" His eyes narrowed. "Now I think you are." I didn't answer. I just watched him. The wind tugged gently at my scarf, the same way the sea pulled at the edge of the shore. Persistent. Slow. "You have cars," he said suddenly. "Real ones. Collector pieces. There was a photo online, a blurred shot, but I know what I saw. You let me take the condo while you sat on millions?" I met his gaze. "You didn't take the condo, it was given, as was the garage. You knew what was in there. I knew your father left me something with meaning. I didn't know the numbers until I opened the door." He shook his head. "You tricked me." "No," I said gently. "I didn't stop you from revealing yourself." He climbed one step. "Are you planning to sell it all? Is that the plan? Sit up here on your high horse while we struggle in the city?" I tilted my head. "We?" "Chloe and I. She left you, didn't she?" His mouth froze mid-word. His hands dropped to his sides. "She left when she realized your version of success was built on borrowed credit and borrowed love," I continued. "She didn't sign up for humility." His jaw clenched. "That's not your business." "No," I said. "It never was." He looked away, toward the ocean. His voice dropped. "So what now?" "That depends on you." He looked at me again, for the first time without anger. Just confusion. Just loss. "You're living better than I am," he said quietly. "Perspective changes with humility," I replied. He turned to go, but paused at the foot of the steps. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because the test wasn't about what I had. It was about what you'd do with what you were given." He looked at the ground, then at me. Did I fail? I didn't answer. I simply stepped back inside and closed the door. Behind me, the pocket watch ticked softly on the mantel. The knock came just after dawn. I'd been sitting by the kitchen window, sipping tea as the horizon shifted from steel gray to gold. The waves were calmer that morning, like they too were holding their breath. I didn't need to look to know it was him. I opened the door before he could knock again. Evan stood on the porch, hands in his coat pockets, dark circles beneath his eyes. He looked older, not by years, but by weight, the kind of heaviness that doesn't show in bones, but in posture. "I need to talk," he said. I stepped aside, letting him in. He walked slowly through the living room, his eyes flicking over the bookshelves, the mantel, the fireplace. His gaze landed briefly on the pocket watch before he turned to face me. "You've been here all this time," he said, "and you didn't tell me." "You told me I was a burden," I reminded him, not sharply, just as fact. He flinched but nodded. I didn't understand. "No, you didn't want to." He looked around again, as if searching for something to anchor him. Chloe left. took what was left in our joint account. She said she didn't marry potential. She married presentation. I stayed quiet. I'm out of the condo, he continued. Behind on the portfolio, too. Turns out managing wealth isn't the same as earning it. I raised an eyebrow. No one told you? He sat down on the edge of the couch like a man unraveling. I hired a lawyer. I thought maybe Dad made a mistake, that the trust wasn't legal, or that you manipulated something. I said nothing. She showed me the documents, he went on. The clauses, the forfeiture trigger. You could have destroyed me if I pushed harder. You did push, I said. And you're still standing. Barely, he admitted. But I see it now. He didn't leave you the garage because you needed it. He left it because you'd respect it. I walked to the mantel and lifted a small stack of papers, copies of Henry's letter, the appraisals, and the trust documentation. I handed them to him. He held them with trembling fingers. What is this? Proof, I said, of what was always there. You just didn't want to see it. He flipped through the pages, then stopped at the letter. His lips moved as he read. His face shifted, first confusion, then anger, then something more fragile. Regret. He planned this, Evan whispered. He knew I'd fail. No, I replied. He hoped you'd rise. Evan looked up, eyes glassy. I don't deserve this. I sat across from him. Maybe not yet, but that's not the end of the sentence. He held the letter like it was a verdict. His eyes scanned it again, slower this time, lingering on each line. I knew where he was. I'd been there too, once, sitting with words that redefined everything you thought was true. He set it down on the table gently, like it might break if handled too roughly. He gave me the condo because he knew I'd flaunt it, Evan said quietly. And he gave you the garage because he trusted you wouldn't. I nodded. Did you know about the safe? He asked. Not until I opened it. And the cars? I looked at him. I knew your father loved beauty that was built to last. That's all I knew. He let out a shaky breath and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I wanted him to leave me something big, something that made a statement, something people would notice. He did, I said. It just wasn't the kind of statement you expected. He frowned. What do you mean? I reached for the pocket watch on the mantel and placed it gently between us on the table. Its silver casing glinted in the morning light, and the ticking was soft, but certain. He left you time, I said, to fail, to learn, to return. Evan stared at it, unmoving. You think that's what this is? Some kind of moral scavenger hunt? No, I said. I think it's a test. He looked up at me, tired and raw. Did I fail? I didn't answer right away. I picked up the watch and held it in my palm, feeling its steady rhythm. When you called me a burden, I said softly, I didn't cry because it hurt. I cried because I realized you believed it. He winced. But your father never did, I continued. And I didn't either. That's why he built this the way he did, to give you the chance to see what we already knew. He covered his face with his hands. I don't know how to fix this. I let the silence stretch between us. Not heavy, just honest. Fixing it doesn't mean going back, I said. It means starting again, with humility, with honesty, with action. He sat back and stared at the ceiling like it might have answers. I thought I was smarter than him, he muttered. You might still be, I said. But wisdom doesn't come from thinking. It comes from choosing. Evan rubbed his hands together, eyes fixed on the pocket watch between us. The ticking filled the room, unbothered by our tension. "I hated that thing when I was a kid," he said. "It always made noise when I was trying to concentrate." He'd leave it on the table during dinner, during arguments, during everything, like some weird reminder that time was watching us. "It was," I said. He looked up sharply. "You're not going to make this easy for me, are you?" "No," I answered, "because what you broke wasn't just a rule. It was a bond." He nodded slowly. "Chloe said I was too proud to see love when it wasn't dressed up in money." Was she wrong? His mouth opened, then shut again. He looked away. "No, she wasn't." I stood and walked to the shelf behind me. From it, I pulled another envelope, one Henry had sealed years before he died. I knew what it was. I had read it only once, and that had been enough. I placed it in Evan's hands. "What's this?" he asked. "A second letter. He wrote it just in case you ever came back with different eyes." He didn't open it right away. He stared at the name written across the front in Henry's steady hand. "To my son, if you're ready." His fingers trembled as he broke the seal and unfolded the paper. He read in silence, lips moving just barely. A tear rolled down one cheek, then another. I let him sit with it, let him ache in it. When he finished, he set the letter down and looked at me. Not as a man defending himself, but as a boy asking for another chance. He said, "Love isn't about leaving doors open forever. It's about building them strong enough to close and open again with purpose." I nodded. He said you would decide whether I walk through it again. I will. He didn't speak. I moved to the fireplace and pulled a small box from the drawer beside it. I carried it back and placed it between us. Inside was the title transfer to one of the cars in the garage. Not the most valuable, not the flashiest, but the one Henry had driven most often, the Mustang. Evan opened the box and stared down at the papers. "You're giving me this? I'm offering you a start, not a shortcut." He lifted the documents gently. "Why this one?" "Because it's not for showing off. It's for moving forward." His voice cracked. "What do you want me to do with it?" "Drive," I said, "but not away. Through." He nodded slowly, running his hand over the edge of the title document like it might dissolve if he didn't hold on tightly enough. "What if I mess up again?" he asked. "You will," I said. "That's the nature of growth." His eyes searched mine, as if trying to find the line between forgiveness and permission. "And if I lose this?" "You've already lost more valuable things," I answered. "The point isn't to keep what you're given. The point is to honor it while it's in your hands." He let out a breath that sounded like release and defeat at once. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I started something," he said, hesitant. "Just an idea, but I didn't know who else to show." He handed it to me. It was a sketch, rough, in pencil, but unmistakable. A building shaped like an open arm, part shelter, part school, with soft contours and wide doors. "What's this?" I asked. "I've been volunteering at a local nonprofit. They help women, mostly older, mostly pushed aside, get back on their feet after financial loss or abuse. I thought maybe I could build something for them, something lasting." I looked at the drawing again. It wasn't polished, but it was sincere. "And you'd call it what?" He hesitated. Then, with a small, almost embarrassed smile, "The Horizon Center." I closed my eyes for a moment. That word again. It wasn't just a motif. It had become a mirror, a reflection of the man Henry was, of the man Evan might become. When I looked back up, he was already watching me, not with expectation, but with hope. I want to be better, he said, not to prove anything, just because I finally understand what it costs when you're not. I believed him, not because he said the right thing, but because for the first time, he didn't try to protect himself from the truth. You'll need help, I said. He nodded. I was hoping if you'd consider being part of the board? I raised an eyebrow. You're putting your mother on a board of directors? I'm putting the woman who survived all of us and still walks with her back straight. I folded the paper gently and handed it back. Then I'll consider it. He exhaled, an audible sigh that shook his shoulders. I don't deserve this, he whispered. No, I said. You're earning it. We sat in silence for a while after that, the kind that didn't sting, the kind that allowed room for truth to settle. The fire crackled softly behind us, its glow casting flickering shadows on the walls. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised lavender, the final colors of day slipping behind the horizon. The same horizon he had drawn, the same one Henry had painted, the same one I had found in my own time. Evan reached for the pocket watch once more. He held it with both hands, reverent this time, like he finally understood the weight of what ticked inside it. He looked up. Will you teach me? I tilted my head. Teach you what? How to listen to time, he said. How to build things that last. A long breath left my chest. For the first time in years, I saw not the boy who took, not the man who demanded, but the son who had finally arrived. You start by being quiet, I said, and then you stay long enough to hear what stays. He nodded. Okay. We stood slowly, and I walked him to the door. Before he stepped out, he turned back and looked at me with eyes that no longer needed to convince me of anything. Thank you, he said. I reached out and placed my hand on his cheek, just for a second. Thank your father. He gave us both one more chance. Stepped off the porch, the Mustang keys in one hand, the drawing in the other. I watched as he disappeared down the road, not running, not retreating, just moving forward. When the sound of the engine faded into the quiet, I walked back inside. The cottage felt fuller now, not with noise, but with breath. I returned the watch to its place on the mantel and let the ticking echo gently through the room, one beat at a time, steady, true. 3 months passed like a slow tide, days rolling gently in and out, the sky always shifting, but never shouting. I spent most mornings in the garden, tending to sea anemones and wild lavender. Afternoons drifted between long walks and handwritten letters I never sent. Some were to Henry, some to myself, some, I suppose, to the girl I used to be before I forgot how to stand on my own. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. It wasn't postmarked. It had no return address. Just my name, written in a hand I hadn't seen since he was 7, when he used to label drawings with "For Mom" in crooked capital letters. Inside, one line. I didn't sign up for humility. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. The ink was too neat, too controlled, too Chloe. I folded the letter and placed it beside the pocket watch on the mantel. That same afternoon, Evan called. His voice sounded thinner, worn down at the edges like a coat used too many winters in a row. "Can I come see you?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, watched the tide pull back from the rocks. "Yes," I said. "Tomorrow." He arrived with less than he left with. No car, no coat worth mentioning. Just a worn canvas bag slung over one shoulder and shoes that looked like they'd forgotten what comfort felt like. I met him on the porch. He looked up, and for the first time, didn't try to smile. "I've lost everything," he said. I stepped aside to let him in. He sat in the same spot on the couch where he once read Henry's letter, though now he didn't touch the table or the fire or the things around him. He sat with the posture of a man afraid his presence might bruise the furniture. "She left me," he said. "Took everything she could, even the plates." I nodded. "I know." She said I was empty, not just broke, empty. I sat across from him, hands folded in my lap. "Do you believe her?" He hesitated. "I didn't at first. I thought it was just the money, the condo, the image. But then I started noticing how quiet it was without her. And instead of feeling peace, I felt hollow." I stayed silent, letting the air do the work of honesty. "I went to see Dad's old architecture mentor," he said. "The man who gave him his first commission. Thought maybe he'd throw me a project, something to get me back on my feet." "And?" Evan gave a bitter laugh. "He said I didn't know how to build anything that lasted, that I was designing for ego, not for people." He rubbed his palms. Together, gaze fixed on the floor. "He said I'd been building walls my whole life, not homes, not spaces where people feel safe." "That's an expensive realization," I said. "Yeah," he breathed. "It cost me everything." I stood and walked to the mantel, picked up the pocket watch. I held it between us. "You know what this is?" He nodded. "But you don't know what it means." He met my eyes. "I'm listening." I sat beside him, the watch ticking gently between us. "This watch stopped the day your father died," I said, "and I didn't wind it again. I thought if time stood still, maybe grief wouldn't feel so loud." He said nothing. "But time didn't stop," I continued. "It never does. It just waits to be honored." He reached out carefully, as though asking permission, and I placed the watch in his hand. "I want to earn this," he whispered. I nodded slowly. "That's the only way you'll keep it." He blinked quickly, then looked down at the watch again. "How do I start?" I rose, walked to the writing desk, and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "These are 3 conditions," I said. "Not for forgiveness, for restoration." He took the paper and opened it. Therapy, consistent, honest, no exceptions, a public apology. Not just to me, but to those you disrespected in your fall. Found the Horizon Center. Document it. Build it. Lead it with humility. He looked up. "You're serious." I nodded. "Redemption isn't a gift. It's a job." Evan folded the paper slowly, his fingers trembling just slightly. Whether from shame or resolve, I couldn't tell yet. He looked back at me, something softer in his gaze than I'd seen in years. "I don't know if I deserve that chance," he said, voice low. "That's not for you to decide," I replied. "It's what you do next that earns or forfeits it." Silence settled between us like snow, quiet but undeniable. Outside, the wind rattled the oak leaves. Inside, the air held its breath. Evan leaned back against the sofa, staring at the ceiling. "Chloe's gone," he finally said. "She left a note. Just a line, really. I didn't sign up for humility. I didn't flinch. I simply nodded. Some people are mirrors. They only stay if the reflection flatters." He huffed, a dry exhale that almost passed for a laugh. "That condo? I sold it. Or tried. Market's down." I looked at him calmly. "Henry didn't give you that condo as a reward, Evan. He gave it as a test." Evan's brow furrowed. "A test?" "To see whether you'd recognize what mattered more, the view or the values that built it." His mouth opened, then closed again. He sank further into the sofa as if the weight of those words added 20 pounds to his chest. What mattered to him? He asked quietly. I took a deep breath. Integrity, resilience, quiet strength, and the ability to see people, not just their roles, not just their use, but their worth. He nodded slowly, eyes still far away. I think I'm starting to understand. I walked over to the window and parted the curtain slightly. The horizon glowed in the distance, dusky and vast, not flashy like the skyline he once coveted, but calm, steady. You'll stay here tonight, I said gently. He looked surprised. I can? I'm not inviting you in as my son, I added. Not yet. You're staying as a guest, one learning how to earn his way back. His face dropped with something like humility. Understood. I turned from the window. There's clean bedding in the guest room. Breakfast is at 7. He gave a grateful nod and rose to his feet. Teresa. He paused. Mom. I held up a hand. Not yet. He nodded again, and this time he didn't argue. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the old pocket watch resting on the nightstand beside me, its ticking faint but steady, like a whisper from Henry. I watched the ceiling in silence, the events of the day tumbling over each other in my mind, the collapse, the fear, the choice to stay, not to punish, but to pause. Mercy wasn't weakness. Mercy was the strongest thing I had left to give. At some point past midnight, I rose and walked quietly down the hallway. The door to the guest room was ajar. I peeked in. Evan was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He didn't see me. He was staring into the dark like it might answer something. I didn't speak. I let him have the silence. By morning, he was already in the kitchen, standing awkwardly by the counter. He had made coffee, badly, judging by the overpour, and he looked up like a teenager caught sneaking in late. I didn't touch anything else, he said quickly. I took the mug, sipped, winced. You were never much of a barista. He smiled faintly, and for once, it wasn't smug. We ate breakfast mostly in silence. Toast, eggs, fruit. I didn't ask him about his plans. I didn't push him toward apologies or declarations. After clearing his plate, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. I spoke with a foundation consultant yesterday, he said. I want to start something, not in my name, in Dad's and yours. I raised a brow. He placed the envelope on the table between us. The Horizon Initiative. It's small for now, focused on trade skills and integrity-based leadership programs. I want to rebuild, properly this time. I didn't touch the envelope yet. And what happens if no one believes in your change? He nodded slowly. Then I'll believe for them, until they see it, or not. But I'll keep going either way. My eyes met his. Now you're starting to sound like your father. His throat bobbed. That's all I ever wanted. I just didn't know how. You lost your compass, I said softly, but it was always in your pocket. His eyes flicked down. I opened my palm, revealing the pocket watch, ticking quietly. I think he would have wanted you to have this, I said, placing it in his hands, but not before today. Evan held it like something fragile, something sacred. I'll earn it. No, I said gently. You already started to. Later that afternoon, Evan left, not in shame this time, but with a kind of reverence. He didn't take the Mustang. He took the bus, said it felt right to begin again from the ground up. I watched from the porch as he turned to wave at the end of the driveway. His silhouette framed by the tall trees of Astoria, his stride no longer weighed down by arrogance, but lifted by something else. Purpose, maybe. Or peace. Inside, the cottage felt different. Lighter. I walked back into the garage, not to mourn, but to remember. The dust didn't bother me now. It was a witness. Every tool still hung on its peg. Every sketchbook still carried Henry's careful hand. I traced one blueprint. A small side note in the margin read, "Integrity is a load-bearing beam." In the far corner, a final box sat untouched. Inside was a framed photograph of us, me, Henry, and Evan as a boy, standing in front of the very same Mustang, back when it was just a dream on wheels. Tucked behind the frame was a note. Henry's handwriting again. "If they find their way back, meet them at the horizon." I closed my eyes and let the silence settle. For the first time in months, maybe years, it didn't feel hollow. It felt whole. That evening, I lit the porch light. I wasn't waiting. I was welcoming. And as the last of the twilight melted into stars, I sat back in the creaking wooden chair, pocket watch in hand, ticking quietly, counting not the seconds lost, but the ones we'd still find together. It's been 1 year. 1 year since I turned the key in that dusty garage and felt the weight of everything I thought I'd lost pressed down on my chest. 1 year since I sat on a cold cot, wrapped in silence, with nothing but memories and a letter I hadn't yet dared to open. Now, the Mustang sits under a new roof, clean, humming, restored. But I rarely drive it. I keep it not as a machine, but a memorial, a promise kept, a lesson learned. The garage isn't just a garage anymore. It's the Horizon Center now. The sign out front is hand-carved, hung by Evan himself. He used the old cedar plank Henry had been saving for something that mattered. Now it welcomes the next generation of young architects, mechanics, engineers, kids who'd been told they had nothing real to offer. Just like Evan once was. Just like I once felt. Every week, a new pair of hands takes apart an engine, drafts a roofline, learns what it means to build, brick by brick, truth by truth. Clara helped us set up the nonprofit trust. Nora donated some land next door for community gardens. And Liam? He teaches the classic car program every Thursday with the kind of joy that can't be faked. Evan's the director now. He wears button-downs instead of tailored suits. Sometimes I catch him rubbing his hands together, not out of anxiety, but to work the calluses. His voice has softened. His shoulders sit lower. The Skyline condo is long gone, sold to fund the first round of scholarships. At first, people asked if I was scared to trust him again. I wasn't. I wasn't offering blind trust. I was offering a test. And he passed. He shows up early. He stays late. He listens. Not just to me, but to the kids, the crew, the echo of his father's name etched in every beam of this place. Some mornings, I walk into the office early, before the lights buzz on and before the coffee finishes brewing. I sit in the corner where Henry's drafting table used to be, now replaced by a long walnut desk Evan built himself. It's not perfect. There's a small chip in the side, a ridge where the wood didn't quite sand flush. But I run my fingers over it like a scar. Proof that healing doesn't mean erasing. It means continuing. On the wall above me hangs Henry's final sketch, one I found folded beneath the floorboards of the garage. A pencil drawing of the same garage, but brighter, clearer, with the word Horizon shaded in careful block letters above the door. He knew, he always knew this wasn't about real estate. It was about responsibility, redemption, renewal. There's a photo of Henry and me in Rome, our honeymoon, clipped beside the sketch. We look young, terribly hopeful. I wore a scarf he bought off a street vendor because the colors reminded him of dusk. That scarf, somehow, still smells like him. Sea salt and lemon soap. The scent lives in the fabric, like a whisper. One afternoon, I brought it to the office. I didn't say anything, just hung it carefully over the back of the leather chair in the break room. A silent tribute. No one touched it, but everyone noticed. A few days later, one of the boys in the mentorship program asked about it. So I told him the story. Not just of the scarf, but of the man behind it. And for the first time in months, I didn't cry. I smiled. He said, "Your husband sounds like the kind of person who gives people a second chance without saying a word." I nodded, because that was exactly it. Henry's final gift wasn't just to me. It was to all of us. Today, the Horizon Foundation runs mentorships across 4 cities. We focus on second chances, young adults from difficult starts who want to build things that last. Not skyscrapers, not glass condos, but places that hold people together, shelters, libraries, art centers, co-ops, the kinds of structures Henry once said had moral architecture. Evan oversees the West Seattle chapter. He doesn't talk much during the board meetings, but when he does, he listens first. And when he speaks, it's not for show, it's for change. Sometimes I catch him glancing at the old Mustang parked outside. Restored now. It's navy, paint glinting under the coastal sun. He drives it every Sunday, not because it's flashy, but because it reminds him of dirt, of sweat, of something earned. As for me, I'm not who I was a year ago. I still walk with a softness, still believe in silence, but I no longer fear being called a burden. I know the weight I carry is made of legacy, not shame. At night, I sit by the kitchen window of the Astoria cottage. A chipped teacup in my hand, my pocket watch ticking gently on the table. Sometimes I open Henry's last letter again, not because I've forgotten the words, but because they feel different each time I read them, like time carving new meanings into old truths. "Forgiveness," he wrote, "isn't a gift. It's an invitation. I think I finally accepted it. The horizon outside fades from gold to navy. The tide pulls away slowly, leaving behind lines in the sand. Some lines, like some loves, are meant to last. And I, Teresa Harlow, once forgotten, once dismissed, remain not just the keeper of keys, but of quiet legacies. And tomorrow, like every tomorrow since that night in the dusty garage, I'll begin again."